my name is Sarah, and today we are wrapping up the first quarter of 2017. So in 2017, I am no longer doing monthly wrap-ups. You may have noticed that I did not do one in January, February, and this is obviously not a March-specific wrap-up. I decided to do that because for a variety of different reasons, wrap-ups were just no longer that fun for me anymore. So I started thinking through ways I could still share what I'm currently and or recently reading with you guys, but without doing monthly wrap-ups. And so I decided to go back to a thing that I did at the beginning of last year when I was doing those sort of 5-book wrap-ups here and there called Stats, Stars, and such. So rather than a monthly wrap-up, each quarter I am going to give you guys one of these videos. We're going to go over the statistics of what I read. I'm going to give you every single book that I read, including the star rating and maybe 1 or 2 sentences about that book in particular, and then I'm going to share with you my favorite and my least favorite read from the first quarter. So with that lovely introduction, let's jump into it. The first quarter of 2017 was pretty slow for me, to be honest. I obviously did a lot of reading right at the end of 2016, and I was kind of burnt out, not just on BookTube, but on reading in general. So I took a really slow start to the reading year, and it's honestly taken me most of this first quarter to get into my reading groove. In the last week or so, I feel like I've finally gotten back into that point where I'm reading on a more consistent basis and wanting to read more than I was at the beginning of the year. So like I said, things were pretty slow to start, but in a lot of respects, it was, I think, good for me to just give myself a little bit of a break and to not put so much pressure on myself to be reading all of the time, and that just gave me a lot of time to rest and reflect on some other things. But I, like I said, feel like I'm finally getting some momentum and getting back into that groove, so hopefully the reading will be increasing in the second quarter of the year. With that, let us jump into the statistics. In the first quarter of 2017, I read a grand total of 9 books for a combined 2,315 pages for an average of 257 pages per book. 7 of those books were new reads and 2 of them were rereads, 3 were part of a series, and 6 of them were standalones. Looking at the genre breakdown, 1 was general fiction, 1 was general nonfiction, 1 was literary fiction, 2 were memoirs, 2 were mystery or thrillers, and 1 was poetry collection. 7 of those books were for an adult audience, and 2 of them were for a young adult audience. 2 of the books were written by men, and 7 of them were written by women. Looking specifically at the setting, 4 of the books were nonfiction of some kind, and therefore did not have a setting. 1 took place in the United States, 2 took place in the United Kingdom, 1 took place in Venezuela, and 1 took place in Greece. Looking at the publication year, 1 of the books was published in or before the 1920s, 1 was published in the 1930s, 2 were published in the 1970s, 1 was published in the 1980s, 1 was published in the 2000s, 2 were published between 2010 and 2016, and 1 was published in 2017. Those are just a few of the statistics for my reading for the first quarter of 2017, and now I'm going to share with you all 9 books that I read and their star ratings, but rather than do it in chronological order, we are going to start at the lowest star rating and work our way up to the highest star rating. Starting with my lowest rated book for the first quarter of 2017, which was A House Like a Lotus by Madeleine L'Engle, the third and final book in the O'Keeffe family series, which I gave 2 out of 5 stars. The next highest at 3 stars was Chasers of the Light by Tyler Knott Gregson, a poetry collection. Coming in at 4 stars each, we have Dragons in the Water by Madeleine L'Engle, the second book in the O'Keeffe family series, along with The Summer of the Great Grandmother by Madeleine L'Engle, the second book in the Crosswicks Journal series, Overdressed, The Shockingly High Price of Cheap Fashion by Elizabeth L. Klein, and the final 4-star book was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. I had 3 5-star books for this first quarter of 2017, but 2 of them were rereads and only 1 of them was a new read. The first of those books is Persuasion by Jane Austen, which was a reread, and I gave it 5 stars this time around, just like I did the first read. Next was Peace Like a River by Leif Anger, which was also a reread. This was my favorite book of 2015, actually. And finally, my favorite book for this entire first quarter, my first read of the year, and the only new read to get a 5-star rating from me, Chasing Slow by Erin Lochner. Those are all of the books that I read in the first quarter of 2017. I have more extensive reviews of all 9 of them on my Goodreads account, which I have linked all of those individual books in the description below, so you can check that out if you would like to read a little bit more of my thoughts. But before we wrap it up today, I'm going to share with you some more extensive thoughts on my favorite and least favorite books of the quarter. My least favorite book, you may have guessed from the low star rating, was A House Like a Lotus by Madeline L'Engle. As I said, this is the third and final book in the O'Keeffe family series, and if you're at all familiar with Madeline L'Engle's books, you know that there are three big family series that all intertwine in some way. The most well-known of those, of course, is The Time Quintet, which, as many of you know, houses A Wrinkle in Time, my all-time favorite book. And this particular series primarily follows Polly O'Keeffe, who is the oldest child of Meg, Murray, and Calvin O'Keeffe, who you meet in The Time Quintet. I read the first book last year and obviously finished up the last two books in the series in the first quarter of this year, and really there were just a lot of weird things about this particular book. It was written in first person, which is not bad necessarily, but the entire rest of the series is written in third person. And legitimately, if I did not know it was a Madeline L'Engle book, I never would have thought that it was a Madeline L'Engle book. The writing style felt completely different, particularly when you compare the style in this particular book to the style in The Time Quintet, which is just lovely and wonderful and whimsical and flowy and all of this other stuff. But I think my bigger issue was the story itself and the characters. Even though we spend two full books prior to this one with Polly O'Keeffe, she really does not feel like a very well-developed character. She seems relatively flat. As the book begins, Polly is going on a trip to Greece and Cyprus, and you learn that she had this friend that somehow betrayed her, and she just can't get over this thing and is having a hard time forgiving her and all this stuff. And that whole thing is built up a lot as you progress through the story, and you really take the vast majority of the book to work through their relationship and get to the point where you finally know what happened. And when we finally got there, I found myself wondering why it was such a big deal and why this was such a huge issue, because from the way it's presented in the book, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that she felt so betrayed by what seems to happen and stuff like that. But I think my bigger issue in the series was Polly O'Keeffe is 16 in this book, and there are a couple of guys that are older, that are in their early to mid-20s that she has relationships of some kind with, and it just made me feel all kinds of uncomfortable and icky. And yeah, there were many issues that I had with some of those relationships that, like I said, they just made me feel incredibly uncomfortable, and I was not okay with them at all. And again, like, so much of this book just did not feel like Madeline L'Engle at all. And if you are reading the O'Keeffe family series, I would say that you could skip this book and it would not make the slightest difference other than the fact that it introduces some characters that show up in other books. But it was really not that great. In major contrast to that, my favorite book of the first quarter was Chasing Slow by Erin Lochner. So I discovered this book very close to the beginning of the year as I was reading a post by one of my favorite bloggers where she mentioned 17 books to read in 2017, and they were all books that were published and they were listed in the order they were being published, and this was the first one on the list. I read the description, immediately texted my roommate, and within an hour had ordered the book. It showed up a couple days later, and I didn't quite devour it because this is not the kind of book to be devoured, but I kind of did. So Erin Lochner was a popular lifestyle blogger. She had an HGTV show and just all sorts of stuff, and she lived a very busy, frantic lifestyle, and this book is her memoir of moving from that busy, frantic, frazzled, crazy life to a much slower, simpler, more intentional lifestyle. And if you guys saw some of the books that I read at the end of last summer, Present Over Perfect by Shauna Niequist and Essentialism, you may have gathered that that is something I've been doing a lot of reading and research on a slower, more intentional kind of lifestyle, because I am naturally a pretty high stress person who is prone to busyness and the like, and I have been finding myself just drawn to slower, simpler, more intentional and the like. And so the thing that I think I appreciated the most about this book in comparison to some of those other books is, aside from the fact that it is beautiful, like, just the design of this book is absolutely lovely. So as a designer, I really appreciate that. But as far as the content is concerned, Erin's writing style is beautiful. The way that the story flows and the way all the chapters flows is just absolutely exquisite. But for me personally, one of the ways that I connected to this book in a way that I haven't connected to some of those others before is Erin struggles with anxiety. And it's not something I've ever really discussed here on the channel, but I do have a mild anxiety disorder. It is not severe. I do not have to take medication for it, but it does affect my life and has been affecting my life a bit more in the last couple of years than it ever really did before. And so reading about not only just a person who's sort of shifting toward that lifestyle of slower and simpler and more intentional, but reading about someone who struggles with the anxiety and the pressure that can come with that was just absolutely wonderful. It really, really connected with me in such a special way and was just a fantastic, fantastic book to kick off this reading year with, particularly having followed that like anxious, frantic pace of the last month of 2016 and starting this year in general off just at a slower pace. If you are a fan of memoirs, if you've been doing any reading or have any curiosity about that kind of stuff, I would highly, highly recommend it. I have started following Erin's blog since I read the book, and in the last 3 months she has very quickly become one of my favorite writers. It's absolutely lovely. I highly, highly, highly recommend this one. Well, there you have it, friends. That is my wrap up for the first quarter of 2017. If you have read any of these books, I would love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know in the comments below. If you want to follow me elsewhere online, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Goodreads, all at Sarah Ann Hayes. The links for those profiles will be in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye! Today we are wrapping, oh, there's hair in my eye. Oh, for 26, book in